everyone, I'm Reverend Jim. This is the whole Bible, the series where we're going through the entire Bible from beginning to end. We are up to Genesis 12 through 15. If you've missed the previous 11 chapters, go check out the previous videos. Also, if you are concerned about the title of this series, the whole Bible, well, that's why it's censored. That's why it's blurred. That's why you really don't know what I'm saying. The whole entire Bible, the whole amazing Bible, the whole fill-in-the-blank Bible. See, it could be anything, whatever you thought it was. That says more about you than it does about me. Okay, now that we got that settled, let's go into Genesis 12 through 15. We have a new character, a new main character who we're going to get kind of as a name for the rest of the whole book. This is Abram. Now, he's not Abraham yet. That's the name we often know him as. Father Abraham had many sons and daughters. Here, he's just Abram. We'll talk more about the names and what they mean when the name gets changed. But this part of the Bible, this part of Genesis, this is a significant shift. We are moving from a universal humanity to the call of a particular people through Abram. Up until now, we've been looking at all the peoples of all the earth, creation and all the descendants and Noah and all those descendants and the Tower of Babel and all of that. That was last week. Now we have a single character. This is also, like we've been saying for all of Genesis, Genesis 1 through 10 is myth, Genesis 11 through 50 is legend. This is not history, this is not a historical account. Yeah, there might be some historical coincidences, some overlaps between what you can find in archaeological evidence, but there's not a lot of data to support the text happening the way it happens in the text. Did that make sense? Don't let that stop you from reading the Bible. We still have a story within the page. We still have a narrative that we are invited to explore and experience. And that's something. That's a way of experiencing things. Someone wrote this story. Someone narrated, edited, brought all these various pieces together, and gave us what we have here. This fantastic library and collection of all these ancient books. Now, let's get back to this one. Here we have 3 chapters. Nope, here we have 4 chapters. 4 chapters, 12, 13, 14, 15. Let's just talk about each one, give a little title and an overview. Okay? Okay. Chapter 12. I would call this one Call and Covenant. This is kind of where the story of Abram begins. Abraham is called to leave his homeland and journey towards a promise, and he does. This blessing is not just for him, but it's for all the families on earth, blessed to be a blessing. Abram's faith and migration becomes an act of trust and courage. It models a vocation rooted in movement, openness, and blessing. This is a big story because this is a culture where you stayed where you were with your family. That was kind of the whole world. And so Abram went is kind of a significant paradigm shift. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on here too. How did Abraham hear this call? Did God speak to others and Abram's just the one who was paying attention? That's kind of an idea we'll get to in Exodus 3 with the burning bush. I like that direction. I like the thought that God is always speaking, but we sometimes just aren't listening. And maybe Abram was someone who listened. There's also, I think it's Midrash on Abram's family being idol makers. And I just love the thought that he was out home with his family doing the business, carving an idol, and he hears this voice. Is this one talking to me? And he follows the advice of the talking idol. What was it like for Abram's family to see him go, to send him off? Like we don't know anything about that departure. What was the relationship? Was there a rift? What was that like? We don't really know much of that, but we know Abram leaves. Now, this chapter also has him going to Egypt, and he has this moment where he passes off his wife as his sister, and it turns out that's not a good idea. It'll happen again later, and then that is cyclically repeated again and again as well with some other stories in Genesis, so we'll come to that. No, he calls his wife Sarai, not yet Sarah, his sister, which is technically kind of true. We'll find out in Genesis 20 that according to the text, they're half-siblings. So there you go. So there's chapter 12, Call and Covenant. The big thing of this is Abram's call and God's covenant that Abram will be blessed to be a blessing. We got more covenant coming in a little bit. That's chapter 12. Chapter 13 is conflict and generosity. So apparently Lot, Abram's nephew, came along on this little road trip, and they decide to separate because there's a little bit of conflict going on between Abram's group and Lot's group. They are more than just, a minivan full of family and luggage. This is like a whole caravan of goods and people and servants and lots of things, no pun intended with the name Abram and Lot. Now they separate peacefully because there's a little bit of conflict between their shepherds, their sheep herders, goat herders. We should probably just read it to know for sure. Flocks and herds and tents, the land could not support both of them living together. So there's strife between the herders of Abram's livestock and Lot's livestock. We got some herder conflict. So they decide to separate. They go different ways. And Abram's like, hey kid, which way do you want to go? And Lot's like, well, that looks like wilderness. That looks like civilization. So Lot goes towards the cities. They're known as Sodom and Gomorrah. There are other cities there too, but those are the two that we typically know. More on that later. And Abram goes the other way. And this chapter really highlights humility, nonviolence, and the wisdom of letting go. It's just another, chapter in Abram's journey here. But you would think that to be blessed to be a blessing, you'd go where the people are.
I want to be where the people are.
You'd go where civilization is. You'd go where society is, where there's structure and something that can, fulfill those blessings. But Abram's like, okay, you can have that. I will keep trusting God. So conflict, we got some conflict, generosity. Abram's got lots of generosity. And the journey continues into chapter 14, rescue and blessing. Oh, okay. So apparently Abram chose wisely because Lot is over there in the city and there's a little war that breaks out. And Abram comes to rescue his nephew Lot from this regional warfare. And this is where this chapter gets interesting. Abram's blessed by this guy Melchizedek, a mysterious priest king of Salem who honors the God Most High. This is interesting because we have no priests according to the story yet. We haven't gotten to the Levites and all that. So we have already evidence of lots of traditions coming together, and there are more stories happening than there are stories on the page. God was at work even beyond the stories that got recorded. Melchizedek is an example of that. He honors the God Most High. And this story emphasizes solidarity in conflict, the pursuit of justice, and the recognition that divine blessing transcends tribal or religious boundaries. I love it. It's not about just my tribe versus your tribe, but this divine blessing goes beyond it all. Whew. And then there's chapter 15. Abram continues. We have promise and faith. So we've began with a covenant in chapter 12, and here, a few chapters later, that covenant is reaffirmed. God promises descendants as numerous as the stars and as many as the sand. This is look at the sky. What do you see?
Look at the stars.
That's the scene here in chapter 15. And Abram's trust is counted as righteousness. That's a phrase, a theme that will come up later in the Christian scriptures. I think the book of Romans, Paul's big into that Abram's faith is counted as righteousness, showing that this covenant is sustained by faith, not certainty. It's this whole section so far. Abram just choosing to go, following this call, picking the wilderness rather than the civilization, going beyond the tribal boundaries to rescue his nephew, and being blessed by this priest of the Most High that wasn't a part of the people of Abraham, but apparently God knows no borders, and now God knows no limits with this blessing as numerous as the stars in the sky. Whew. Now we're gonna hear 4 chapters, 4 videos. Chapter 12 is from me. Chapter 13 is Reverend Hillary Kimsey. Chapter 14, Reverend Adrien Thorne. And chapter 15 is Alli Lee. We have great contributors for the whole series. And let's take a look at these 4 minutes. Here we go. Bible in a minute. Genesis chapter 12. And Abram went. These 3 words are the turning point in the book of Genesis. What had been a people tied to country and kin, honoring your family by carrying on their legacy, comes this rogue agent, Abram, who hears a voice telling him to go, and Abram went. We can so often become comfortable and complacent, content to be where we are because change requires risk, and risk means we might fail. So too often, we stay. But Abram went. Because for Abram, God's blessing doesn't come by staying put, but God's blessing will be found along the way. And this blessing is not something for him to hide and hold, but he is blessed to be a blessing. His journey will take God from here to everywhere. Abram went. And so perhaps we should too?
Bible in a minute, Genesis chapter 13. Abram and Sarai are out on the road and they run into some conflict. You see, Abram has acquired quite a few possessions, silver and gold, tents and flocks of animals. And his nephew Lot also has a lot of things. Pretty soon, Abram's sheep herders and Lot's sheep herders are at each other's throats. They're saying, there's a scarcity, there's not room for all of your things and all of our things in the same space. And Abram says, let's pause. There's enough room here. We're supposed to be united in kinship. So you go that way, we'll go that way, and we can continue in peace. This chapter makes me think about how we're often so concerned with our sense of private property or personal possessions that we overlook chances to serve one another as neighbors. God offers Abram this expansive vision of the world where there is enough to go around, enough time, enough space, enough resources. What would our world look like if we chose to protect our neighbors rather than our property?
Bible in a minute, Genesis chapter 14. Whoa, we're only 14 chapters in and already there's a war. 4 kings against 5 other kings. The 5 had been oppressed for 12 years, but in the 13th year, the 5 rebelled. It didn't go well for them. The 4 kings seized all their goods, all their food, and Abram's nephew Lot, who was living in Sodom. When Abram hears this, he assembles more than 300 men and recovers all the goods and his nephew along with his nephew's people. The king of Sodom greets Abram upon his return and blesses him. Give me the people and you keep the goods. But Abram replies, I've sworn an oath to God and will accept nothing belonging to you, so that you cannot say that you made Abram rich. Who gave you your gifts, your abilities, your everything? Abram publicly declares from where his help has come. I've sworn an oath to God, and God has been faithful. May we all be as clear as Abram in declaring God and God alone as our source.
Bible in a minute, Genesis 15. This chapter asks 2 questions. Can Abraham trust, and can God be trusted? The answer to both is yes. Abraham can trust, but it's not a trust of resignation or subjection. He speaks freely with God, even protests God's promise, asking why and how he should trust this promise when all the evidence seems to be against it. In Abraham's frustration, God draws his attention to the stars and invites him into the incomprehensible awe and wonder of the night sky. If God can somehow create all this, surely somehow God can be trusted. And this trust is affirmed through the curious rituals and reflections found in the remainder of this chapter as a covenant is introduced. This assurance of covenant, how this promise will be practiced, fortifies Abraham's hope and trust in God as he and Sarah continue to live with barrenness until this promise is made good.
All right, welcome back. Good to have you with us 4 minutes later. So first question is always, what stands out to you? What do you notice? Notice what you notice. Leave a observation, comment, question, snide remark in a comment place. And then here's some specific questions that might be helpful too. How does Abram's call challenge our assumptions about safety, belonging, and home? How can power and victory be used for restoration rather than domination? And what symbols of hope, like the stars, sustain us when promises feel far away? Leave a response to any of those. And next week we have a little more Abram, but he becomes Abraham. So we got Genesis 16 through 20 in the next video where Abram becomes Abraham. And I'll see you there.